SalesCrunch. Learn more, earn more.
Three qualifying methods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a quick scenario. So let's look at you got Mary. Mary's an experienced business-to-business account executive. Mary sells video conferencing solutions that include software and hardware. So that's what Mary sells, video conferencing software and hardware. She's got typical questions that she asks as she works her way to a deal. So some of these questions are, what kind of meetings do you hold that require participation of people in far-flung locations? What are the costs associated with those meetings? If I could show you a solution to save those costs, would you be interested in seeing a demo? That right there is a very typical sort of sales question sequence that I tend to see that ultimately telegraphs to the buyer, what you're really trying to do. And in a lot of ways, it doesn't yield honest answers. Because if you think about it, it's kind of like, so what kind of meetings do you hold that require participation from people in far-flung locations? So I answer, well, we hold 4 a year. They're pretty important meetings. We need people to be there. So what are the costs? Well, it's actually pretty expensive. We've got to fly everybody in. We've tried conference calls. They really don't work well. We really need to have the ability to have people interact. Well, if I could show you a solution to save those costs, would you be interested in seeing a demo? Salespeople tend to go right for that, and in a lot of cases, they don't know enough yet to see if there really is a true need or a fit there. And you run the risk now of spending time with somebody you can't necessarily buy. And this whole method of, quote-unquote, sort of the power of three qualifying allows you to ask questions in a way that you're not going to leave valuable information on the table. So let me walk through sort of how this method works. So if you think about Mary's first question, Mary's first question was, what kinds of meetings do you hold that require participation from people in far-flung locations? That's a perfectly fine question. And the prospect may answer, well, we do them fairly frequently. We have to hold them 4 or 5 times a year. We've got to fly everybody in. It's a fairly challenging process. We do it fairly regularly. So the next question, which she asked, which this is a little bit of a variation. So if you think about it, how often do these meetings need to occur for you to accomplish your business objectives? That's a fairly logical flow in the question. What kind of meetings do you hold? How often do you need these to occur to accomplish your objective? So the thing is, though, we don't really know on which side of the line does a need exist. And that's an important thing to understand, because usually what happens is salespeople go linear in their questions. And the next question is logically, so this happen often? If I could show you a way to make that more effective. But really, you have a need on either side of this line. There could be pain on the left of this line. There could be pain on the right. So I always look at it the fact that you need 3 sort of critical qualifying questions to sort of ensnare the need. So we're now going to ask the third question that isn't a question designed to elicit, do you want to see my solution, but more, have I narrowed in on a pain point? So another question we might add here is, so what kind of success would you have if you could gather more frequently? Right? Because they're asking, how many meetings do you hold? How often do these need to occur? So would you be more successful if you could actually gather more frequently? And the answer may be no, could be yes. So now I've done this sort of triangulation around a potential pain point. If there's no, I can ask another question to create another triangle of 3 questions to identify a pain point, which could be, what steps do you take now to keep costs down for these meetings? So it's not if I could show you a way to keep costs down. I don't know if costs are really an issue. So I want to frame that in and say, is there a pain point there? So I'm always looking for these triangles of 3 questions where I can, in a sense, ensnare a need or a pain point that I can then explore further and develop a bunch of different needs that I can then zero in my product and really understand, does this prospect fit my best qualification framework? It's a very powerful technique. I've used this a lot across my career. I teach people here at HubSpot how to do this technique so that they're snagging needs relative to what the buyer is actually trying to accomplish. So again, just to be really clear, what you're trying to do is ask a series of questions, like in this case again, what kind of meetings do you hold? How often do you hold them? Would you be more successful if you had them more frequently? If the answer is yes, I've identified an opportunity there, or perhaps some pain. Then I could ask, so what steps do you take now to keep the cost down? So now I've ensnared another need on the other side of the line, using this sort of construct of 3 minimum questions to ensnare a need. So with that whole idea, it creates sort of this powerful situation where you're able to put qualified needs and urgency on the table and pain points that then you can connect the value of your product or service to it. And you can use this technique really at any point across the sales process. It will work on your initial qualifying call when you pick up the phone and go to book an appointment. It will work as you do your initial qualifying sequence when you're sort of doing some needs development, need discovery before you move to demo. When you get into a demo situation, if you don't know everything that you need to know based on prior qualification, you can use it at that point. But it's always important to try and triangulate around that need. Make sure you're very clear that you know that it's there. And it usually takes more than 2 questions to do that around the subject to nail that in. Now, certainly you can ask more than 2 questions, but the notion is trying to zero in on that. Now, with that, I'm going to move into 2 of the biggest mistakes that salespeople make in qualifying, and also in trying to apply this particular technique. And the first question, or the first mistake, really has to do with what I call jumping to conclusions. So if you think about our previous scenario, right, Mary asks, so how many meetings do you guys have to have in order to be successful? And so says, well, we need to have 4 a month. And is it expensive to have those? Yes, it is. Well, Mary jumps to an immediate conclusion that, all right, I've got a great solution. I can lower those costs. I can get them a better deal. They're a great fit for our product. So she's made the assumption that they're a buyer. So she's jumped all the way down here to position G, so to speak. She's asked 1 or 2 questions. She's kind of gone from A all the way down to buying. And in a lot of cases, her buyer, let's say it's Bob, he's still back at A. He hasn't gone all the way down there with her. He can't follow her. And the reason being is salespeople tend to have the same conversations over and over and over and over again, right? Because it is a fairly repetitive job in that regard. You're selling a specific product, there's a specific process you're going to follow, and there are conversation points that you're going to have over and over and over again. So what happens is a salesperson stops listening. They hear a fragment of an answer, and they go, I know what this is all about. I know where this is going to go. I know what the solution is. And bang, they drop right down there, and they just go for it. In some cases, that may work, but in most cases, they're not effectively qualifying the prospect, and now they're starting to put solutions on the table that they don't know will line up with the prospect. And when they go for the close, objections just start to fly. So really what has to happen is Mary needs to ask a series of questions to drag Bob down with her to G. So it's kind of like if you think about our power of 3, right, we're going to ask sequences of 3 questions. So in this case, it could be, how many meetings do you have to hold? Or how often do you have to have them? Could you have them more often and be more successful? What are you doing now to contain the cost of those? Are there other tools that you've looked at to see if there's ways that you could do other types of meetings? If you're kind of bleeding down to the point where you get to the stage that you know, okay, they need to have a lot. They're definitely trying to control the cost. If they met more often, they'd be more productive. They have looked at other tools, but they're concerned whether or not they're going to work. They're concerned about the expense associated with those tools compared to the efficiency of getting everybody together. So now Mary's got a lot more information. She's fleshed it out a lot more, and she can go, well, given everything you've described, I actually think that X, Y, and Z would solve those issues that you have, as opposed to hearing that first nugget and dropping right down to solution. And here's why that's such a problem, and it's really the second mistake, and it's all around making assumptions. So jumping to conclusions and making assumptions, in my opinion, are 2 very different things. So when we think about making assumptions, it kind of works like this. In the scenario, Bob says something, Mary hears it, and she makes an assumption. She says, okay, I know what this is all about. I'm now going to wait for Bob to stop talking so I can go ahead and give my great thing that he's going to go, oh, this is awesome. It's the solution I've always been waiting for. So what Mary really has done, she's made a decision. So for every assumption Mary makes, she's now going to make a decision in the conversation that she's going to pursue. So she's picking a line, and she's starting to go down that line. So Bob's talking, and she's holding in her head, okay, I got this thing I'm going to say. Bob takes a breath. Mary jumps in and says her thing. Let's say Bob says, oh, that's interesting. I'll follow that line. So he's going to say something else. She's going to make another assumption, and she's going to keep following that line. And she's going to get all the way down to the bottom where she's going to ask for the close. But the problem is the sale's actually all the way over on the other side. So she's going all the way down this path and landed somewhere where Bob's going to go, actually, you know what? That's not what I need to buy in order to be successful. Or I don't think that's actually going to address the problems that I have because my problems are really these. And her issue is she can't make the leap over there. So the earlier Mary can realize that she's making assumptions, she can jump to the right track. I give you a great example from HubSpot. There was a gentleman I was working with on helping him become more successful at curtailing his drive to make assumptions on calls. He absolutely had this challenge. He was making lots of assumptions on sales calls. So we were working on this. We were doing a lot of listening to calls that he'd held, a lot of observations, and trying to point out when he would do that. And one of the things that I got him to recognize was the physical feeling of when he's making the assumption. Because if you think about it, it's really a physical thing. I'm listening to Bob talk. I've shut off my active listening. I'm now locked into my head what I want to say, so I'm in an internal dialogue with myself, and I'm waiting for Bob to take a break so I can say my stuff. That's a physical thing. The more you can get somebody to realize that they're making that physical decision, the easier it is for them to stop making the assumptions and stay in active listening mode. So this gentleman, he's speaking to a marketer, and we sell marketing software, and he asked this woman, how many leads did you add to your database last year? How many email addresses? And the woman says, we added 1,000. So he's going on, and he assumed that was a great number. So he's going on, and he realized like 3 minutes later that he made an assumption about that number. And he says, you know what, I beg your pardon, I need to take a step back. I made an assumption earlier that you added 1,000 names to your email database, and that was a good thing. Was it? And she actually went, no, we needed to add 10,000 last year. And all of a sudden, the floodgates opened, and all kinds of needs started flowing out. She started sharing all kinds of stuff. Had he stayed on that path, he definitely would have gone down our road that he really didn't understand what her challenge was. He would have put value on the table. It would not have matched up with her issues. She wouldn't have bought. And that's really the problem, is when you get down to the bottom, the leap back to the right line is too big. You just can't make that jump. You've committed yourself to a line of reasoning. You got all the way down to the bottom. You're not going to make the jump. So the earlier people recognize their assumption-making habits, the easier it is for them to jump over to the right line and work their way down to where the deal actually is. So with that, I want to put a couple of key takeaways on the table for you guys, and then open it up to questions and dialogue around the subjects that we've just discussed. So again, qualifying skills are critical for sales success. The more adept your salespeople are, or you as a salesperson are, at asking qualifying questions and developing question paths that allow you to really capture specific pain points and needs, the better off you're going to be. The more you think about those high-impact questions, really understanding your ideal buyers, your qualifying criteria, the questions you need to ask to uncover those qualifying criteria, to make sure you're spending time with the right people, the more successful you'll be. And then avoiding those very common mistakes of jumping to conclusions and making recommendations that don't fit, and then making assumptions and committing yourself to a certain line of reasoning that's not going to land you in a sale. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and share anything else I can with you guys on the art of qualifying in a Sales 2.0 world. It must be done.
Great content, key content. We have some comments here.
Well, thank you. That's excellent. Again, I'm more than happy to share any more insights on different qualifying techniques, dive deeper into any of these concepts. I know I stayed fairly high level.
We have one question. Can you talk more about the feeling of assuming?
Sure. So, yeah, definitely. So the way to kind of recognize that, and you can recognize it in your sales. If you're a salesperson, there are ways to recognize it in yourself. If you're a sales manager, there's ways to recognize it in the people that you're coaching. The biggest thing is recognizing the switch from listening to talking to yourself. That's really the key thing, is to recognize that I'm now talking to myself. Because what happens is you're listening to somebody and they say something that clicks with what you know is a value point about your product. It clicks in your head and you recognize it. You feel that click, that connection. And you go, okay, I know what this guy's talking about and I know what our solution is for that. So you jump from A to G in your head. And now what happens is you're holding in your head the response, because you know what you want to say now, and you get concerned that I'm not going to remember it. You start talking to yourself, and you're not actually listening to them anymore. And part of that is being confident in the fact that you will remember it. You know what it is. You don't need to talk to yourself. That's really the point where you need to be more dialed into what they're saying than ever. Because where the sale is lost is in that window of time where you've locked that thing in your head and you're waiting to speak and they're still talking. If they're giving you details, they're giving you nuance, that's going to shape the way that you're going to talk about this. And if you believe it or not, you probably spend a good, I would say, 40% of your time listening to yourself over the course of the sales call. Right? In a lot of sales calls, sales reps talk way too much. So they're listening to themselves talk in their head, and then they're talking out loud. And when you're doing that, you're not really getting out for the buyer what they need to buy. Because I really look at selling it this way. I'm just helping them buy something, particularly in B2B. When you're selling business to business, companies need to buy stuff. They need to buy things to be successful. And the question is, are they going to buy your stuff to aid in their success? So I'm trying to help them buy. And that's a big way to do that. And the next question we have right in that vein is, do you have any techniques to aid reps in improving active listening? The big thing, again, it comes right back to that, is silencing your inner monologue. And a lot of that comes from what I would call sort of a need for approval. A lot of salespeople have a need for approval. And in that, they're kind of like wondering, is this customer going to buy from me? Do they think that I'm smart enough? Do they think that I know enough about their problems? And that inner monologue really inhibits their ability to be successful. And it's one of the things to really try to do as a salesperson is, do I have that need there? Do I have that need for the prospect to like me? Do I have the need for that prospect to sort of respect me and all that kind of stuff? Now, granted, you want them to do that, but if they need that to happen, they're not going to be listening. So if you have a frank and open dialogue with a salesperson about, the way they feel they're perceived, and they'll tell you, like, I want to be seen as a consultative salesperson. I want to be seen as a salesperson that really helps my buyers succeed. Those can be some hallmarks of people that have that sort of need to be approved by the person who's buying. And that's going to prohibit them from really asking the tough questions because they're afraid of souring the deal. When really, if they soured the deal, the prospect probably wasn't going to buy anyway, so they're wasting time with people who can't buy. So I hope that's sort of helpful in that regard. Another question we have is, what's your strategy for when you've gone down the wrong path and jumped to wrong conclusions? That's an excellent question. And in a lot of cases, when you realize that, it's being honest. It's just looking that person in the eye or being very frank over the phone and go, you know what? I owe you an apology. I think I made a series of assumptions in our conversation, and I really didn't understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then see if you can back the thing up. If they're a real viable prospect. If you feel they're a real prospect and they actually are qualified, but you've gone down the wrong path, the most strongest, straightforward way to do that is just admit that you made assumptions and back it on up. Because again, the sales process is a relationship between two people, right? You're having a strategic conversation in which ideally both parties win, right? They buy what you're selling because it helps them advance their cause, whether it's, moving their business forward, or as a consumer, getting more self-esteem or better, reception on my TV or whatever it is that I need, that I want to get to make my life better as an individual. That's really what you're trying to do, is connect. So the more honest you are in trying to make that connection and really help them decide whether or not they want to buy your product, really works well in today's environment. Because remember, the context of all this is the fact that buyers have access to an unprecedented amount of information. So if you go at it from the angle of, I'm really going to help this person decide whether or not they want to buy what I have to sell. And the earlier I can figure out that they're not a buyer, the more I can move on to somebody who is. Because that's where a ton of waste comes into the sales game, is when I spend time with people that can't buy.
We also have shown, it says, when making the initial call, the prospect knows you are about to qualify them. Any techniques on how to ease them into that process?
Sure. I think, again, it comes down to, being open and honest, and it also depends on the way that your leads come in. Like for us, we have a lot of inbound leads. We also have reps here that do cold calling for those that don't necessarily know what we're all about. And, one of the things that we do is we always offer some type of insight to establish some trust with that prospect. So one of the things to think about is, are there things that you can provide to that prospect early on in the call that are of value to them, that help position you as a person with credibility and ultimately a person they can trust? So like for us, as an example, we sell inbound marketing software. One of the things that we'll do prior to making a call is we'll look at a website and we'll look for areas where they might be missing out on some best practices that could make that website yield more leads, more sales, more customers. And we'll give free tips on that. We'll say, I was checking out your website, and one of the things I noticed was X, Y, and Z is actually off. If you were to fix that, you'd have a much better success rate in getting found in search engines. So my recommendation would be change this, this, and this. And usually prospects are kind of like, wow, this person just gave me some insights for free that I can actually act on. And then from there, we start digging in a little deeper on, so, does that website actually play an active role in driving revenue for your business? How does it play a role in moving you forward? And we start easing into that qualifying process. So one of the strong ways in today's environment is to try and provide some level of value over and above what that prospect already most likely has access to, so you can ease them into that qualifying process.
Great. We also have the question, where does the rule of 3 fit into BANT?
Sure. So it actually fits in mostly around really need and timing. It can fit to a degree around budget, right? Because again, or actually, it can fit in around authority as well. Because if you think about it, you ask somebody, this happens to us all the time. So who makes the decisions on buying something like this? And they're like, well, I do. And if you accept that at face value, you actually really don't know. Because there's actually two other elements to that where this rule of 3 comes in again. Who's responsible for making decisions on buying that stuff? Well, I am. Okay, so if you were to move forward today, can you actually execute the order? They're like, well, no, it would actually be the CFO. I need to run it by him. Okay, so can you actually give me some insight into what the real buying process is there? How do you guys actually go about buying something like this? Those are 3 actually very different questions that now ensnare that authority element and what I need to know and what I'm going to need to do in order to get them to buy. So it can play a role really around any element of it. It's really just making sure you don't take the first answer you get at face value. It's usually going to take at least 3 questions to triangulate in on a particular thing you want to know. Because I kind of look at it this way, again, with the budget example. Are you the person that that's responsible for making these decisions? Yes, I am. So what's the buying process like there? Well, we need to do X, Y, and Z. There's still a right and left to that line we just drew. And I need to find which side of the line I'm on. So I've got to ask that third question to really make sure I'm understanding where they're coming from on the right side of the line.
Great. Well, I think we're all set unless anyone has any more questions. And it's about 3:45, so if there aren't any more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. I'd also just like to let everyone know that this afternoon you'll be receiving an email with a link to this presentation. We will also be posting the videos from today's class on our website next week, so please be sure to look out for those as well.
Excellent, everybody. Very much appreciate you attending Sales School today. I hope you got some great insights out of some of the different techniques I shared. Good luck in putting those into practice. I know you guys will have success. Go out there and get them.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
SalesCrunch. Learn more, earn more.